Ready to dive into some serious symbolism. We've got a fascinating one today.
Yeah, Plumb by George Bacovia.
Exactly. It's considered, well, by a lot of folks anyway, a really important work of Romanian symbolism, but also surprisingly, I don't know, relatable. We'll get into it. But
Yeah, it's amazing how he takes something as simple as lead, and makes it carry all this existential weight.
heavy, literally and figuratively,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
So, okay, for our listeners who maybe haven't really delved into symbolism as a movement, think of it this way. It's like the opposite of just saying what you mean directly.
Right, right.
It's all about evoking emotions indirectly through these really carefully chosen symbols.
Like it's more about mood, right?
Right.
Atmosphere. It's almost, like trying to tap into the reader's subconscious, I guess.
Yeah, and Bacovia, he really excels at that, right?
Oh, totally, yeah. I mean, you see it everywhere in his work. Solitude, the sense of decay, inner turmoil. He keeps coming back to these things.
Like a moth to a very distressing flame.
Haha, yeah, pretty much.
But, reading through everything in preparation for this,
Yeah.
I was struck by something. It's like, even though he's writing before existentialism really took off, you can see these hints of it in his work, right?
Oh, absolutely. There's this feeling of alienation, this search for meaning in a world that feels kind of meaningless. It's actually something I find really fascinating about his work.
Yeah, and that really comes through in Plumb, right?
Definitely.
So we've got this backdrop of symbolism, this poet drawn to, well, the bleaker side of things.
Yeah.
And then we get to this poem, Plumb, and it's, I think, something anyone who's ever felt, the weight of the world on their shoulders can relate to.
That's the thing, right? He connects with these very human experiences. And he does it with such powerful imagery. I mean, take the main symbol itself. Lead, it's heavy, it's dense.
Almost suffocating.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's not just that he uses it once, right? He repeats the word plumb throughout the whole poem.
Right.
And every time you see it, it's like that heaviness intensifies. It's almost as if he's physically pressing down on your chest,
Exactly. It's like this sense of being totally overwhelmed. It's not just being a little bit sad. This is deep despair. It's like it's rooted right in your soul.
And it's not just like telling us about this feeling either, right? He uses these incredible images to make us really experience it.
Oh, for sure.
And the imagery in Plumb, it's not exactly subtle. We're talking coffins, tombs.
It's like...
It's not even just death. It's this feeling of being buried alive,
Exactly. It's claustrophobic. It's airless. You feel trapped. Like there's just absolutely no escape from your own existence. And then he takes that feeling and he pushes it outward. It's like it even seeps into the environment of the poem.
Oh, totally. The rain, the cold, it's like the weather itself is in on it, Like even nature is reflecting this feeling of despair.
It's like the natural world just becomes this mirror, right? Reflecting the speaker's inner state.
Totally.
You can practically feel that rain. So heavy and cold. And then there's the silence.
Okay.
It's deafening.
Absolutely. It's like the whole world is just silent, Which just makes that feeling of isolation even stronger.
Right.
Like he doesn't even have to come out and say, the speaker's alone. You can just feel it.
It's right there.
But you know what else I thought was interesting?
What's that?
It's the structure of the poem. It's almost like it's two-ordered,
Oh, interesting. You mean how it's divided into those two stanzas?
Yeah. And they're symmetrical, 4 lines each.
Right.
Like that structure itself almost feels confining.
Yeah, totally. It's like it's mirroring the speaker being trapped, unable to break free.
Exactly. And then you've got this perfect AABB rhyme scheme. The meter, it's iambic, right?
It is, yeah.
Steady, like a heartbeat.
Right.
But slow.
Yeah, right.
I don't know, painful.
It does have that feel to it, like the poem itself can barely breathe.
That's a great way to put it.
It's subtle, but it really adds to that whole feeling of being overwhelmed,
Totally.
Yeah.
Every decision, feeds into that atmosphere.
Exactly.
And then there's that metaphor, that love of lead. It's like, bam, right there.
Yeah, it hits you hard.
It's not even just that the love is gone.
Right.
It's like it's become something, I don't know, bad for you.
Yeah, it's been twisted into something else, right? It's heavy, inert, almost toxic.
Yes, exactly.
It's like when something that used to be good.
Like a joy.
Right. It
Idle
comes
burden.
that past weighing you down.
And for Bacovia, I mean, it seems like it all goes back to that feeling of just being stuck, right? Like you said before, that emotional paralysis.
I think so, yeah. He really seems to be grappling with that. It's not just sadness, but this deep inability to feel...
Even love, something we usually see as like the opposite of that.
Exactly.
he makes it cold.
Lifeless.
And that's where I think his writing, it's not just personal anymore.
Yeah, it becomes something bigger.
It's like he's touching on something universal, like you were saying before. It's almost...
Existential.
Exactly. He's dealing with these huge questions about what it even means to exist.
And to exist in a world that can feel really meaningless, right?
Yes. And he's doing it decades before anyone else is really talking about this stuff. It's like he's staring into the void, and he's like bringing us along with him.
Yeah, and forcing us to look at it, too.
Which I've got to say, sounds kind of intense.
It can be, yeah.
But I mean, isn't that what good art is supposed to do?
Maybe, yeah. Make us deal with the stuff we'd rather avoid.
The big questions.
Yeah, the stuff that really gets under your skin.
And Plumb definitely does that.
Yeah.
I mean, who hasn't felt that way?
Yeah.
Right? That feeling of just being totally crushed by everything.
I know what you mean.
By life, by your own emotions, by, I don't know, just the absurdity of it all.
It's like he's tapping into something very primal, you know?
And that's what I think is so amazing about it.
Yeah.
Here's this poem that was written over 100 years ago in a totally different context, different country, different time, and yet it still feels so relevant.
It's time.
Totally. Because he's talking about something that's like fundamentally human.
Exactly. That search for meaning.
The alienation.
Your doubt.
It's like he's reaching across time and saying, hey, I feel this too, you know?
Yeah, and it makes you feel less alone in those feelings, you know?
Yes, exactly. Listen on. It's like he's whispering his own fears and anxiety.
Right there on the page.
And letting us in on them.
It's that vulnerability, I think, that's what makes it so powerful.
So, okay. If we had to sum it all up, what would you say is the core of Plumb?
That's a good question. I think it's this. Bacovia is not just writing about being sad. It's about what it feels like to really experience the weight of existence, you know? And I think the real power of this poem is that it stays with you long after you've finished reading it.
Makes you think.
It makes you ask yourself, have I ever felt that way? That heavy? And if so, what does that mean? How do I deal with it?
Wow. Yeah. I like that. So, for our listeners, there you have it. Plumb by George Bacovia. A deep dive into despair, symbolism, and the search for meaning in a sometimes very meaningless feeling world.
And who knows, maybe you'll find some of your own anxieties reflected back at you.
Maybe we all will.